Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of our D Horizons articles. Today, I'm joined by Jane Hatton from Evenbreak, who I believe you're in London at the moment. Is that right, Jane?
That's right, yeah.
And how is it there today?
It's a bit grey, it's a bit rainy, but it's amazing. I love living in London.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Jane and I have had a few. I don't know that we've been in the same room yet, have we, Jane?
No,
It's
we
always
haven't met face to face yet.
been digital, but we did some interviews about 5 years ago on an employment e-course, and we sort of have lots of phone catch-ups to hear what's going on. But yeah, I remember last time we spoke, you were planning to move down to London, so it sounds like it's been a good move.
It has. I mean, as I've said before, it's a little bit like the social model of disability in action, because I've got the same impairment now that I had before, but I can get around independently and spontaneously. That's not the case for everybody in London, I know.
Yeah.
Because my particular disability means that sitting is a real problem. Usually, in order to travel around, you have to sit if you're in a car or on a train or wherever. Whereas in London, on public transport, you've pretty much got to stand whether you want to or not. So I don't look odd standing on buses and tubes, and it means I can get anywhere I want to independently and spontaneously without having to rely on a driver. So it's kind of been really liberating for me moving here.
That's great to hear. Well, we'll obviously come on to some of the work stuff in a little while, but I'm sure it's made work things a lot easier as well.
Oh, so much, yeah, definitely.
So in terms of a bit of a backstory, it'd be great just to share with the viewers a bit more about you and your impairment and how you got into the work that you've landed up in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just very briefly, I was a diversity trainer long before I became disabled myself.
Okay.
So I would be travelling up and down the country talking to employers about why they should employ a diverse range of people, the benefits of employing a diverse range of people. I mean, race, gender, disability, the whole kind of spectrum. And I noticed when I was talking about disability particularly, and of course I wasn't disabled at that point, that there'd be two kind of responses from employers when we were talking about disability. That'd either be, why on earth would I want to employ a disabled person? I mean, not necessarily in those exact words, but you knew
those sentiments. Yeah.
Or actually, we recognise that we should be employing disabled people, but we don't really know how to go about it and non-apply and what should we do. Excuse me, just wiping my nose. And I kind of clocked that, but didn't really, do anything about it. And I talked to disabled people and I said, why aren't you applying for jobs? And they said, well, because we don't know which employer is which. Nobody says on their advert, we will discriminate against you if you are disabled. They all say we're equal opportunities employers or whatever. So, but our experience is that as soon as we mention we have an impairment, that's when the recruitment process comes to a very abrupt halt.
Yeah.
So we're kind of reluctant to apply for jobs because why would you keep knocking your head against that brick wall? I kind of clocked that as a huge problem, but I didn't have the solution to it, wasn't disabled myself, carried on doing what I was doing. And then I became one of the 83% of disabled people who acquire an impairment. Mm-hmm. And turns out I have a degenerative spinal condition, which sort of manifested itself in chronic pain. And I've had a number of surgeries over the years in my lower spine and more recently in my neck. Mm-hmm. And it turns out all my discs are knackered, I think is the technical term.
Technical term, yeah.
Yeah. And so the surgeries have had mixed results. Some have made me much worse. The neck one was quite helpful. But it's left me with chronic pain. Sitting is a huge issue. And it's one of those things you just don't think about until you can't do it. Mm-hmm. And it's affected things like my left hand doesn't work as well as it should because the nerves got crushed in the neck and all that, all sorts of weird and wonderful symptoms you get from having a knackered spine. And so then I kind of thought, this issue about disability and employment suddenly became a bit up close and personal. Mm-hmm. And I thought, excuse me, I think I've got the end of your cold. So I thought, actually, we ought to do something about this. And one of our directors at the previous diversity training company said, how do I attract disabled candidates? And in my training mode, I gave him a big long list of about 50 things he should do to specifically attract disabled candidates. And he said, I just don't have time for all this as well as everything else I do. Wouldn't it be good if there was an organisation that did this for us? Mm-hmm. I kind of came up with let's do that. So we
Lightbulb moment.
On board. Yeah, it was one of those light bulb things. if we have a job board that's just for disabled candidates, and we do the attraction, so we go out and we gather together in all the diverse places that disabled people congregate, because there's not just one place that we all go to, or one book we all read, or whatever.
Sure.
But if we use all of the diverse attraction strategies for attracting disabled people, then those employers who recognise this as a pool of talent they should be using can advertise their jobs on our board, and we've got the audience for them. So that happened in 2011. And it worked really well, because what happened was the candidates were saying to us, not only do we feel confident to apply to an employer who's paid to go on a job board that's only going to attract people like me, because they've got confidence that that really means something more than just a strap line on an advert. Also, they are more confident to be open about their impairment, which means that the recruitment process is much easier, because then the employer can put any adjustments that might be needed in place, rather than at the last minute realising, oh my God, we need a British Sign Language interpreter and we haven't got one, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So it's worked really well. And as a social enterprise, the other part of what we wanted to do was to really raise the game in terms of accessibility and inclusion in the workplace, just to make the workplace as inclusive to disabled people as it is to non-disabled people. So there's a lot of proactive training, not so much training, more awareness raising with employers about the business case for employing disabled people. Because I think the biggest barrier is that employers will say, yeah, it's a shame for those disabled people, and we ought to give them a chance, and but we are a business, not a charity. And it's kind of coming back and saying, this has nothing to do with charity.
No.
This is about talent that your organisation needs and isn't currently attracting. And trying to turn the conversation into, this is a business issue, this isn't a corporate social responsibility, or let's feel sorry for people. This is about talent that you're not accessing now and that you need. Yeah. So that's kind of what I've been doing since 2011.
That's phenomenal. It's so nice how you hear again and again that kind of story where people are going along and they're having this experience and that experience, and they've got no idea that what's about to come, that kind of put all that together, and there's this really beautiful kind of product or service or project or initiative, which Evenbreak absolutely is. I'd be interested. I know when Shrin and I were looking at all sorts of different things off of Horizon in the past, and in the end we went down the kind of travel and the accommodable route, which worked out well in the long run. But in the early days, you have that beautiful moment, that light bulb moment of how it can all work in theory. And then when you start off, to get one person on the website feels very difficult. I mean, how was that for you when you actually started out?
I think I had the light bulb moment, which was helped by this colleague who made the suggestion, and it seemed to me like an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah.
That every employer would look at this and think, great, we need to use that. And every candidate
climbing over each other.
And it would be perfect. But of course, with the job board, you need two groups of stakeholders growing at the same time. Yeah. So you need candidates, otherwise the employers aren't interested, and you need jobs, otherwise the candidates aren't interested. And 6 months in, we didn't have one. We had no income at all. No employer had paid. We'd given freebies out to try and build.
Yeah, which is part of the early days a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah. But nobody had paid to put their jobs on the site, and I, after about 6 months, I was thinking, this was a really good idea, but it's not going to work in practice. And I was really quite downhearted because it seemed such an obvious solution. And then I had this idea of writing out to CEOs of big employers, not because I expected a response from them, but because if they handed that letter, this was like hard copy letters rather than the emails we all use these days.
Right, okay.
If they handed that letter to somebody, in their team, that person's going to respond to that letter. They're not just going to throw it away. Whereas if I phone up and say, can I speak to the HR manager, or can I speak to so-and-so, it's easy to fob me off. But if this so I thought, it's worth a try. And we had a phone call from somebody at Network Rail who said that, we're really interested in what you're doing. And I said, oh, good. And they said, can we be your corporate sponsors? What? Yes, of course you can. And that was kind of a tipping point. And I think that other organisations then saw what they were doing and thought, oh, it's good enough for Network Rail, it's good enough for us. And
it's the domino effect, isn't it?
It is, and I think people don't like to be the first. They like someone else to test it out. And when someone else has tested it out, they think, oh, yeah, we need a bit of this as well. So thankfully we hung on for a bit, and now we have all sorts of organisations like Channel 4 and Lloyd's Banking Group, and John Lewis, and all sorts of big employers use us now, which is fantastic.
Wow, that's really nice how that's all come together. So
Yeah.
I mean, looking at both sides of that, I guess you call it a marketplace to get a bit business speak about it, but it is a marketplace of the two sides. So I mean, when you're speaking to the employers, obviously you mentioned the fact that others were there before and that sort of helped, but what other worries have you sort of come across that you feel that you're able to give them the solutions now?
I think there's a lot of myths around about employing disabled people. The first one being, as we said, that kind of pity factor. So it's kind of knocking that one on the head.
Yeah.
Also, I think there's a huge myth about the costs of employing someone who's disabled, and actually most disabled people don't need any money spending on, it might just be flexible working hours, or working from home 1 day a week, or avoiding the rush hour on the way in, or, back from work.
Yeah.
So I think sort of relaying people's anxieties about, we're going to have to knock the building down and rebuild it, and we're going to have to start writing all our policies from scratch. And it's really about, there might be one or two things that you need to do, which are actually good practice anyway, so it's a good idea to do them. And it's trying to just reassure employers that this is a source of talent that you can actually access, of people who are highly motivated to work, are likely to have less time off sick, fewer accidents in the workplace, know all about the disability market, the purple pound. So it's actually a commercial decision. And I think once you get onto that kind of conversation, you feel much more easy about it, and about selling the business case to other people within their organisation. Yeah,
it's just kind of educating and empowering someone to then win over other people in the business to be engaged. And so on the other side of the coin with disabled people, I mean, obviously we're going to do your top tips in the D Horizons tribe later in the week, so everyone can tune in for the actual full tips. But I mean, it'd be great to hear a couple of thoughts on kind of advice that you give people seeking jobs, but also your general views on the different needs of different impairments, and probably how the social model would help with getting that back over to the businesses as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think for me, it's about saying to candidates to focus. This sounds DWP speak, and it really isn't intended to be, but actually focus on what you can do.
Yeah.
I know that when I first became disabled, and I was kind of lying in bed for most of my life at that point, all I could focus on, even though I'd been a diversity trainer for 14 years or something, all I could focus on was what I couldn't do. I can't do this now, and I can't do that now, and I used to be able to do this, and I can't do that now. And I think it probably took me 2 years to get to the point where I started thinking, actually, this isn't really very helpful. I think it would be more helpful of me to think, well, what can I do?
Yeah.
Still use a computer, albeit lying down with the laptop suspended above me. I can stand up in meetings. I still have all the knowledge I had before and experience I had before. And I think it takes a while to go through that process of actually starting to focus on, because I think the world tends to focus on what disabled people can't do. It seems to be a deficit model.
Yeah.
As a human being like any other, except they can't walk, or they can't hear, or they can't, whatever it is. And it's very much a negative kind of perception. And I think that I find that a lot of candidates will do that. I couldn't do a job that meant I could do this, or I couldn't, and they're telling me what they can't do. Actually, no use at all. What I need them to tell me is,
what can you do?
But what can you do? What kind of job could you do? What are you looking for? What are your skills? What do you enjoy doing? So I think for me, it's very much about recognising that whatever the impairment is that we have, that isn't the problem. The problem is the barriers that we face.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of candidates on the autism spectrum. Now, people on the autism spectrum have a different way of thinking. Not a worse way of thinking, not necessarily a better way of thinking, but a different way of thinking, which means that in some situations, their way of thinking is far superior to ours, neurotypical people. But the barrier that they face isn't that they're autistic, it's that recruitment processes really aren't designed, well, for anybody much in mind, but particularly for people on the spectrum in mind. So things like interviews are really quite difficult for a lot of people who are autistic. And yet we tend to rely on interviews as a way of recruiting people, which actually isn't a great way anyway, because there's a lot of research that says interviews are a very poor indicator of future performance. And I'm sure we've all done it. We've interviewed people and thought, fantastic, that candidate's brilliant, taking them on. I thought, not as good as we thought. And then you might take on someone who didn't perform particularly well in an interview, and they turn out to be the best employee you've ever had. So I'm not sure that interviews really work for anybody very much, but certainly not for people on the autism spectrum. And things like, CVs, that's a fairly common first entry into the recruitment process. And for a lot of disabled people, their CVs don't reflect the skills that they have. So they might have gaps in their CV, or they might only have short, tenancies with particular employers. And as a recruiter, you look at that and think, they've never been in a job for longer than 2 months. They must be rubbish. But actually, the situation might be that the employers haven't put in place what needs to be put in place. There's nothing wrong with a candidate. And so I think for candidates, really, what we would say is sell yourselves. What skills do you have? What can you bring to the organisation that maybe other people can't? And for many impairments, the impairment itself can be a benefit to an employer. So someone who's autistic tends to go back to that example, tends to be quite focused on what they're doing if they're left in an environment where they're not distracted. So they're much more productive, they get on with the job, they don't want to get involved in the office gossip about what happened on, it's a huge generalisation and everybody's different, but you know what I mean? They'd rather be given the task, left to get on with it, and they'll stay there till it's done. And so I think it's about recognising all of the brilliant things that we bring to an organisation. And actually, any impairment that we have, we've had to develop skills in getting around obstacles that other people don't even notice are there. So for you, with your travelling, you have to plan in advance to know how you're going to get to somewhere, who's going to be there when you get there, what's the accommodation going to be like. Whereas for most people, it's just, we'll see what happens when we get there. And, you can't do that if you have impairments that need adjustments. That gives us project management skills and organisational skills that maybe other people don't have. And I just think it's looking at what benefits we've gained. I mean, I'm not a creative thinker by nature, but boy, have I had to develop creative problem-solving skills since I haven't been able to sit down.
Which are transferable into the workplace.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
so that's my biggest one, I think.
Yeah,
asking for what you need,
Yeah, there's often this sort of feeling of being a burden, which all comes back to the media and some of the government rhetoric that's going on. But sometimes, we all need some kind of help. And someone said to me yesterday that maybe independent living should be interdependent living, because nobody truly is able to live on their own. We all need some help from others. So as you say, to have that confidence to ask when there is something that you're struggling with is a really positive thing, not a weakness or whatever.
I mean, bringing someone in to decorate your flat is no different from bringing someone in to help you get dressed in the morning.
No,
it's
exactly.
about someone else helping you with a task that you'd rather or can't do yourself.
Yeah, 100%. So in terms of with Evenbreak, are you on both sides of that marketplace? Do you have to get very involved a lot of the time, or have you got ways that you're able to help both the businesses and the candidates with preparing and getting everything as it should, so that sort of the two come together?
Yeah, well, we do that in kind of two ways. So the first way, I think, is that we work in partnership with lots of other organisations. So we don't tend to do hands-on support with candidates because we've got 26,000 candidates.
Is it 26,000?
Yes, and there's only 5 of us.
Yeah, that would take quite a lot of time.
So that's kind of not it's not how we're set up to.
No.
And partly deliberately, because there are so many brilliant organisations out there who are always doing that. So we work in partnership with charities, with Remploy, with working quite closely now with Job Centre Plus. We work with, we write articles, it's a royal we really. Write articles for disability journals like Possibility and things like that around how to present yourself to a prospective employer, how to, proactively go out looking for work, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of second-hand bit. But also on Evenbreak itself, there is a kind of online set of resources for candidates. So it's sort of recorded webinars and things, but it's talking about, a bit like the articles that I wrote for Disability Horizons. It's, when and how and if to mention your impairment, how to ask for reasonable adjustments, how to present yourself in a positive light, where to look for jobs, how to judge the credibility of an organisation, all those kinds of things. But they're online, so they're a bit kind of remote, but they're there. People can access them as and when they want to.
Yeah, of course.
And then we had the idea of doing a similar thing for employers. And that came out because one of the big barriers that we came across when we talked to employers was that they would say, it's not that we don't want to employ disabled people, and that's going to end in a but. It's a bit like, I'm not writing this, and you're waiting for the but.
Yeah.
And in this case, the but was, but we're scared of getting it wrong. Our hiring managers don't really
so much. Yeah.
Yeah, let alone, what do I say to someone who's had a mental health condition, or how do I support someone who's deaf, or I don't know this stuff, it's frightening. So we came up against it so often, we thought that rather than nodding sympathetically, we should do something about it. So we developed, and it was only launched last year, a best practice portal for employers. Now, they do have to pay for this. I mean, obviously the one for candidates is free.
Yeah.
But the portal is ongoing, so we're updating it all the time. And of course, that costs money to do that. And most of the material on there is original, but some of it is about gathering stuff that's already available,
just collating it,
Yeah, but it's led by disabled people ourselves and employers who are already doing really well in this area. So, for example, Lloyds Bank are doing some amazing stuff on workplace adjustments. So we interview their staff about how does it work, what do you do that's different, what have you found that works for you. We've also used candidates. So, for example, a blind candidate who got a job but whose manager was thinking, how do I induct? Normally you show someone around the building, show them where the loos are, show them where the photocopier is.
Yeah.
This guy's blind. How do I do that? So very easy. You ask the blind person, of course. How do we do this? The blind person said, well, actually, it would be really good if you could show me around and I could record what we're doing. And this particular young man uses a cane rather than a guide dog. So he would record, I go through these turnstiles, then I follow the wall on the right, and then I turn right there, and that's where the lifts are. And then eventually he doesn't need the record. It's quite
he remembers it,
and the original line manager's trepidation turned out to be, oh, okay, that's fairly easy then. But actually, he had to learn that. But it's better if someone, rather than having to work it out for themselves, can go to the portal and say, what do I do if, so that's actually turned out to be really useful. We've had a very diverse range of employers using it, signed up to it. So ITN, so they use it. Citizens Advice, they use it. So it's John Lewis uses it. So it's a very varied range of organisations. But what they say is that it just lifts that confidence on. Because that's the thing, people are just so scared of it.
Yeah.
And if somebody can think, rather than me feeling a bit silly and asking the HR manager, do we use this word anymore? Or what do I do in this particular situation? They can go look it up themselves. And there's things on there like disability etiquette, how to be helpful and how not to be helpful. So it's not just for HR people. It might be someone in a team, and someone's going to join that team who has a particular impairment. And the team are thinking, oh my God, what does that mean? And what usually it means is, well, we won't talk to that person in case we say the wrong thing. And they feel isolated. Now it's a case of, this is how it can be helpful. Oh, right, oh, good. And it kind of gives the confidence. So I think raising that confidence level within organisations is really helpful.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a very long answer to it.
No, it's really, really interesting. A really great work you've been doing there. And I think the fact that attitude, it seems to be a bigger barrier as anything. Of course, there are physical barriers, and absolutely there are procedural barriers as well and places. But in the end, if you win over that positive attitude of people, because at the end of the day, that everyone is different. So even if you ask me, well, how I would cope with X, Y, Z, having spinal muscular atrophy, being in a wheelchair, it would be different from someone else with SMA
exactly the same.
in a wheelchair. So it's never one size fits all, but it's having the communication, the confidence.
Yeah.
So,
And I suppose the subtext to pretty much everything on the portal is, if you're not sure, ask.
Yeah.
Don't make assumptions. Don't think that person looks like they're struggling, I'll do this for them. Go to that person and say, is there something I can do that will be helpful? And they'll tell you.
Yeah. And
it's not that difficult, really, but people have to have confidence to do that. And I think that's what the portal does. It just gives them enough knowledge. It's not kind of very technical. It's very short. You know, the videos are 2 minutes long about the do's and don'ts of interviewing somebody with autism or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
That will be led by somebody with autism talking about it, because I could talk about it, but I'm not autistic, so it's not very authentic.
Yeah.
If you hear somebody with autism saying the reason I can't get a job is because your interview process doesn't include people like me, then that's much more powerful. And explaining these are why the barriers are there, this is what you can do to make it easier, and that's how you can access the talent of me. Yeah. And that might be the same for other people with autism, but you'd need to ask them, you know, it's that kind of flavour, really.
Wow, that's really powerful. I really like that a lot.
Yeah, I'm chuffed. I really enjoyed building it. I'm enjoying growing it now, because you meet so many just amazing people. But I think you're right, what you said before. If people don't get the why, they're not going to be interested in the how. Mm-hmm. So, and I find it quite disturbing that even in 2018, we're still having to talk about the business case of employing disabled people, whereas that should have been kind of sorted years ago. But I think unless an organisation gets to the point where it thinks, we need this talent, we're not going to grow without this talent, we're not going to cope with the changing landscape without this talent, they're not going to think about the hows.
Yeah.
Well, we need to make our recruitment process more accessible. Why would you, if you don't think that employing disabled people is a good thing to do? So I did write a book.
Oh, that was my next question, was to share about your book.
Yeah, so about the business case because I can have that conversation with people over and over again, but I just thought, the book isn't written, I'm never going to be J.K. Rowling. It's not
never
written.
Say never.
Maybe I could do fiction next. But it's really more to do with raising awareness. So it's, yes, it's for sale on Amazon and whatever, but for me, it's really about getting people to really think through the business case. And as we said before, the people that I talk to in organisations are often really on board with this, but they've then got to make the case to somebody else, sort of second hand.
Yeah.
And they're not always equipped to do that because they've got so many other things on their plate. So I thought, well, if I bring together all the evidence, because I looked on Amazon and there was nothing there. I think something that was written in 1980 something or other.
But they did.
Yeah. About the business case. There's lots of other stuff, really good stuff, which I've referenced, but getting the evidence was difficult because it's all in different places, and trying to get it together in one place was a challenge. So I did. So it's called A Dozen Brilliant Reasons to Employ Disabled People.
Brilliant. That's a nice title.
It's very conversational. It's not a textbook. It's got references in there, but it covers, well, it says a dozen. There are 14 or 15.
Bonus ones.
Different reasons to why people should employ disabled people. And all of those 13 or 14 reasons might be emphasised differently in different organisations. So for some organisations, they might be struggling with staff turnover. Mm-hmm. So the business case there is, there's a lot of evidence that says disabled people stay in their jobs longer. It's going to be, this is good for you. Or if it's an organisation that has a lot of sickness absence, a lot of evidence that say disabled people have significantly less time off sick. Not all disabled people, of course, because we're all, but on average.
Yeah.
So I think it's for each person then to kind of read the book and think, right, well, those 5 points are relevant in our organisation. I'll put that together in a document, and it shows you how to do that as well, to present the case to the men with the money or the women with the money, the decision makers, so that they can see this is a business issue, not a, that's an HR soft, fluffy issue. No, it's a real commercial business issue.
Wow, you're on fire, Jane. So, final question before we wrap up, really, is looking at the future. What are the kind of plans at the moment for you and Evenbreak?
Well, quite ambitious. So I'm writing the second book, which is the how. So this first one was the why, the next one is the how, specifically around recruitment. We're getting more and more employers on board in the UK on Evenbreak, but we recognise that there's a need for something like Evenbreak globally. Wow. Because we have a lot of candidates from other countries emailing us to say, can you get us the job in the UK? Because there's no chance of me getting a job in my country. And then you think, actually, that's wrong. Why can't they get a job in their own country? So there's a need for this kind of, in Europe and further afield. So I think not in the near future, but maybe over a few years, we might start looking at perhaps social franchising and Evenbreak equivalent in some other countries. And
wow, that's exciting.
But we need to grow bigger in the UK first. So I'm not running before I can walk.
Yeah.
Can't even walk very well.
And how about sort of out of Evenbreak, have you got any personal goals or challenges that you're setting, or is it very much about getting Evenbreak bigger and better at the moment?
Well, Evenbreak does consume most of my life and the book writing, but living in London means that I can have a social life, because I can go to places, because I need to eat. I need a high table.
Okay, yeah.
I can't sit. In London, there are loads of places with high tables, so I've got to explore them all, and they all sell vodka, and you have to try the vodka because it would be rude not to.
Of course.
So social life is great, but on a personal level, I'm going to be a granny in May.
Oh wow! Congratulations!
So that's going to be very exciting.
Even busier times ahead then.
Yes, yeah, exciting. And my other daughter is in Australia, and she'll be coming back to see the baby, so it will be great to see new baby and see my daughter again that's in Australia.
Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today, Jane. It's been really interesting. I'm sure the viewers have got a lot out of our chat on a number of levels, really. I know I did as well. So. And then, obviously later on the week, there'll be your top tips in the D Horizons tribe. So we'll put information below how people can join you for that as well.
Lovely. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.